Hello and welcome to the Developers Forum. This is a forum for developers to show and to teach other developers about a technology or software or anything related to developing, to teach other developers about it. Today's topic is D3. So D3 is a graphing library in JavaScript. It can be found at d3js.org. So D3 stands for data-driven documents. You can see the examples, plenty of examples there of what you can do with D3. It is quite a powerful piece of software. API, you've source code as well. So anything you might need is there. There are plenty of examples out there. They won't always be in the version that you're using. D3 is on to version 6 now at the moment, so the jump from version 3 was a pretty big jump, so there was a lot of breaking changes there. But it should be accessible, and there should be plenty of examples there for the most recent version of D3. Okay, before we begin, we're going to be using HTML, CSS, JavaScript and SVG. If you have a local server running, that would be great. That will help reload your app pretty easily. Python has a local server installed with it, so do PHP and Node, so you can use any of those. So D3 stands for data-driven documents. It's a JavaScript library for manipulating documents based on data. How it works. Okay, so you load your data to the browser, you bind your data to the DOM, you create new elements based on that data, you transform those elements, and you transition state. D3 does not come with any predefined visualizations, so it's unlike other charting libraries which have pie charts and bar charts and all of those things contained within it. D3 is meant for custom visualization work. So you're building a graph, or you're building your visualization from scratch here. It does not support older browsers, and it does not hide your data. You're loading your data into the browser, so any user can check out the console and see all your data. Okay, so the plan for today is a brief introduction to SVGs, by loading and binding data, drawing to the DOM, scales and axes. We might not touch on this. We're looking at a tree graph in lesson 3, so scales and axes aren't really part of that. They're more suited to bar graphs and things like that. So we might not touch on that today, but we will touch on updates and transitions. Okay, SVGs. What are SVGs? SVGs are scalable vector graphics. So these are the canvas on which we draw our graph. Okay, it's an XML-based markup language for describing two-dimensional vector-based vector graphics, and it's essentially to graphics what HTML is to text. Why would we use SVGs? So it is universal browser support. It can be styled with CSS. It has a number of visual elements, so rectangle, circle, line, text, path. It has its own style attributes, fill, stroke, stroke width, opacity. It is a pixel-based coordinate system. So unlike other charts, which 0, 0 refers to the bottom left-hand corner, in this case, in SVGs, 0, 0 refers to the top left. Okay, so increasing the X value moves along to the right, which is as normal, but increasing the Y value moves downward instead of upward. Now, again, we'll be going into a tree graph later on, and it doesn't really particularly matter from that point of view. But in terms of bar charts and things like that, if you're coding up a bar chart and your bars don't start on the bottom of your graph, this is why. So you might have to do a bit of messing around with figures, get your maths on, and just figure out how to fix the Y value so that your bars will hit the bottom of your graph. first things first, data. Okay, it's all about data. So data is structured information with the potential for meaning. Okay, and visualizations start with data. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to tell someone something, and you use your data for that. Okay. In terms of D3, because D3 is a JavaScript library, most of the time you'll be using JSON, but if not JSON, then CSV or text. So also because D3 is interacting with elements in the DOM, it uses CSS style selectors to identify these elements and select them. So you have type selectors where you match the tags, descendant selectors where you match elements that are contained or descended from another element, class selectors where you select all elements of a specific class, and ID selectors, so select the single element that has this ID. IDs should be unique, so there should only be one ID on the page. You can combine selectors as well to get very specific results and access very specific elements. Okay, so quick fly through there. Okay, before I go there, SVGs, I wanted to show an example of an SVG. Okay, so we have example SVG here. So as you can see, it's XML based. It has a number of elements, defs, Gs, paths, rectangles, more Gs, more paths, okay, all contained within an SVG element. So what does this show? So if we open this in the live server, we can see that this is this SVG. We can expect it just to make sure, and yes indeed. We have the SVG, we have the defs, we have the Gs, paths, rect. So we can, one of the reasons why we do this is because there are so many elements here that we can interact with directly with JavaScript and with D3. So say each of these rectangles here, so we can go in, change one of these values here, so set this to 0, and you can see you've an instant reaction here in the SVG. So we can style specific elements and interact with specific elements of an SVG. So that's what makes it handy for using SVGs with D3. The G here is just an element to group other elements together. So sometimes that's handy for if you have multiple parts to a graph and you only want to reference one or you want to split it up, you can combine them. You can add a G element and then combine the other things to underneath it. Okay, so data loading. First things first, you need your data in the browser. Okay, so D3 has many loading techniques. With version 6, it's using fetch. So here's an example web page. Okay, we have a food.csv file here. 1 minute now. I'll get rid of that. Okay, we have a simple index.html here. We have simple food.csv, 2 headers, 6 items in the CSV. Okay, so we want to load this up. So D3 is the object that is returned when you load the whole D3 library. So on this object are all the methods and functions of D3. So CSV is one of those. Okay, so food.csv, d3.csv, pass in the file path. Okay, sorry, we're out of our script tag here. Okay, and then a callback. So, okay, something simple here to see if our data has been loaded. Okay, we'll just console log our data. Okay, we go back to our web page now. I have my local server running on localhost 8000. Open up the console, and we can see our data here. Okay, so we have food and deliciousness. 6 data items there. Now, because it's running with fetch, we have promise related. So, and okay, so okay, 2 things. Okay, it's promise related, so we're going to need a .then function once our data is loaded. What to do with it? So .then function dataset. Okay, but we can also format our data here. So, what do we want to do with it? We don't. Our data set now has capital letters there and there, so we want to remove them. So instead of having food and deliciousness, we can have food reference data dot food and deliciousness data dot deliciousness. Okay, and then we'll console log this and see just how that looks. Reload our page, and now we have an array of values. Lowercase food, lowercase deliciousness. Okay, so, and we can see we have our 2 columns up here. Okay, so we've loaded data. We've done a little bit of, really small bit of processing, but shows what we can do, and then we've console logged it after that. Okay, so we have our data in the browser. What do we do now? Okay, so the line up here, this is a typical, if simple, D3 line of code. Okay, d3.selectBody.appendP.text new paragraph. So again, D3 is the D3 object that has all the functions and items attached to it. We can see that if we go to our page in the console and we type D3. Okay, so that will load up the object or show us the object, and you can open it up and you can see all the functions that are there available to us. Now D3 has been broken up into different modules, so you can load, you don't have to load all of D3. You can pick whichever parts of it you want and just load them individually. So .select body. Select the body tag. So you pass the select method a CSS selector, and it will return the first element in the DOM that matches this selector. Okay, so when we pass in select body, that's finding the body tag and returning that to us. If we want all tags of something, so say all paragraphs, use select all, and that will get all the elements of the passed in selector. Okay, once we've selected the body, append P. So append a P tag to the body selection. So this append creates whatever new DOM element you specified and adds it to the end of the selection. Append returns a reference to the element it just created. This is important. Okay, so we append a paragraph, and then we append returns a reference to that element. Okay, then next method is .text, and we pass in some text to that. So adds whatever text you pass in between the tags of the referenced element. So the referenced element is the one we returned from the append function. So we'll try that out. Okay, we'll go back to our code. We don't need, well, I suppose we don't need to take it away. So d3.select body append p text hello world. Go back to our page, and we have hello world. Okay, so we have a data set loaded, and we're appending data, and we're interacting with the DOM. Now we need to combine the two. Okay, one thing with the way D3 works, many of the methods return a reference or return something, so you can chain it together. So you can chain methods together in D3, allowing you to perform multiple actions in one line of code. This is because many of D3's methods return a selection or a reference. Order does matter in chaining, that's important. So now we want to bind our data. So binding data is taking your data and attaching it to the elements within the DOM. We use D3's .data method to bind data. We need two things to bind data. We need the selection of elements, and we need the data that we want to bind to these elements. Okay, so similar to our previous example, now we have d3.selectBody, .selectAllP, .data, dataset, .enter, .append p, .text, new paragraph. Okay, SelectAllP selects all paragraphs in the DOM. There are none at the moment. Okay, we've no paragraphs in our DOM at the moment. Okay, so this returns an empty selection. This empty selection represents the paragraphs that we will create. Okay, then we have our .data method where we pass in our data set. So this counts and parses our data values. Okay, we have 6 values in our data set. So everything past this gets called 5 times. So data counts and parses our data values and then kind of hands off each datum individually to the following parts of the code. So .enter, to create a new data bound element, use enter. This looks at the current selection, the one returned by the data method, and the data being handed to it. If there are more data values than DOM elements, enter creates a new placeholder, then hands off this placeholder to the next part of the chain. Okay, then we're back to our append p, so this takes the empty placeholder selection created by enter and appends a p element into the DOM. Then it hands off this element reference, and then we're back to our text, new paragraph. So if we try this, okay, we have to run this within, if they're loaded data first, and then run this within the callback function, the .then function. So d3.select body. We can also set up variables here, so we're not always referencing, we don't always have to go d3.selectBody, d3.select this. So you could go, you can say var body is equal to d3.selectBody and then body.selectAll p. So this isn't much use to us now, but if you're calling the same element all the time, like you might do with the G or with an SVG, then it can be handy just to declare it so you don't have to keep writing select all the time, d3.select. So SelectAllP.data, pass in our dataset, .enter, .append p, and .text. Hello, well, hey world, just to make a difference to the other one. So, okay, now we go back to our page, load it up, and now we have hello world, which, okay, so that's interesting. This runs first because this happens before our data has been gotten and parsed. Okay, so JavaScript will run through all your code, being asynchronous, it'll run through all your code, and then this will run this part of the code when it's ready. When the data has been fetched and parsed and ready to go, then it will run this bit of code. So, but it'll run through this and then hit this, load this into the text, and then when this is ready, it'll load this. That's why our hello world is before anything else. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have only 5 hey worlds. Why do we have only 5 hey worlds? I don't know why we only have 5 hey worlds, but we can have a look. We can use our data. Okay, so now we'll, instead of writing hello world, we'll append the type of fruit it is. Okay, so instead of putting in a string, we'll put in a callback. Now enter, like .data and .enter, we have access to each individual datum. Okay, so it is common to use D as a placeholder for datum in D3. So We also have access to the index. So you would use, or it's common use cases in D3 to use I for index, D for the datum, and I for index. Again, these are just placeholders though, so you can use whatever you want. But function D, so, and we want to return D dot food. Okay, we go back to our web page now, and we have green beans, we have egg salad sandwich, we have cookies, we have liver, we have burrito. Okay, so what are we missing from our data set? If we log our data set here again, go back to our page, we should have 6. We're missing our apples. Why are we missing our apples? That is interesting. I wonder if we remove this, will that make a difference? And it does. Because there's already a P there. So when we ran this, there was already a P and it was being rewritten. It was being rewritten. So remove this item. Now we have our 6 items there. Now we also want to say we want to style those things. So we can go style, color, and again we can specify a color. You can use hex, you can use RGB, or you can pass in a function and use your data to provide the color. So normally we might go something like RGB. RGB is 3 values from 0 to 255, so we can go 0, 140, 255. Okay, this isn't using our data at the moment, but it's all blue. Okay, so they're all the same color. But say if we wanted to change this value and relate it to the deliciousness of the food. Okay, so we're going to add in something here. We're going to add in an expression which will resolve to a value, and then we'll concatenate it with the RGB string, so it'll run fine. So our food values are between 0 and 10, and our RGB values are up to 255. So we'll go d.deliciousness and just say multiply it by 25. And then when we come back to our page and rerun it, we can see what people find more delicious than other things. Okay, so right now we're loading data into the page. We're creating elements based on that data, and we're styling those elements based on the data as well. Excuse me. Okay, so pretty simple, but this covers a lot of what you'll be doing with D3. Loading data into the page, parsing it if needs be to a format you need, selecting tags, appending your data, creating elements based on your data, and then styling them. Okay, so we're going to leave it there for that first video, and hopefully see you back for the second one. Thank you.